This is a topic that both Alison and I have received so many questions on even before we started the podcast. Alison is a rye sourdough bread expert. She has made hundreds of loaves over the span of years, and she has really honed in on a lot of the specific nuances and details of working with this amazing, delicious whole grain. In this episode, Alison and I break down some of her favorite reasons for using rye bread, as well as discuss her newly launched course, Rye Sourdough Bread Mastering the Basics. And we also have a discount code for podcast listeners. Listen for that at the end of the episode or check the show notes. I can testify to the fact that Alison has put all her heart and soul into creating this incredible course for you guys, for the world, and her family has eaten a lot of rye along the way, and they've told me about it, and they love it. So let us know how you like the course and how you like this episode, but I think you are going to love it.
Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen podcast with Alison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen.
Hello, Alison. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. It feels like such a long time since we've recorded.
I know. This is weird. I mean, we still talked, but we didn't record, so I feel sort of...
Yeah.
We had a coyote incident last night with coyotes just literally screaming and going crazy in the woods, and the dogs were going nuts, and Gary ended up walking out there just to see what was going on. But then they started again this morning about 4 right after I got up. I don't know. It was weird. Anyway, so the kids were all kind of up and wondering what was going on. So,
I'm not surprised.
yeah, but here we are. Nice, cozy morning to record. And I'm really excited about what we're recording today, Alison, because this is probably one of, if not the top question we get is about this subject. So it's about time that we're recording.
Yeah, it's about time.
But before we go into this delicious and decadent subject, first I want to say welcome to all the listeners and welcome to the patrons who are sponsoring the podcast and bringing it to all of you. We actually have 2 new ones at the time of this recording to say thank you to. So that's Alex and Reese. And Alex joined at the sponsorship level, and Reese is on the companionship level. So thank you guys for choosing to sponsor this podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. We are working on our first live chat for the patrons who are at the companionship level or above. And I think it might have just happened just as this podcast goes out, which is an exciting development.
Yeah.
I'm excited about
that. That is something that you and I had in mind from the very beginning that we wanted to do. So that's pretty exciting. And go ahead and Reese can go in and check out that extra podcast that we have for you. So hopefully you find some good things in there.
Yeah.
Alison, did you eat before we got together?
Yeah, I did. I had ground beef or minced beef, depending on what part of the world you come from, mixed in the cast iron pan, a dish which is going in our forthcoming e-cookbook, which I cooked in home rendered tallow with some onions and cabbage, and I used coriander and cumin and some garlic and a little bit of tomato paste, and I had that with a mishmash sourdough, which was kind of all the flours that were kind of left in the cupboard, some spelt, some whole grain spelt, some home milled barley, and some rye that was whole grain, and also some partially sieved rye, and some chocolate barley malt that was whole, so little grains of chocolate malted barley. So I just threw it all together. I've kind of taken to making my breads without weighing much. When I'm in the mood, I just put it all in a bowl and see how much water it takes, and it turned out lovely. So I had a big thick slice of that with half of it had lard on it and half of it had butter on it because I couldn't decide.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
Which one I wanted.
I like that.
So yeah, it was delicious. How about your breakfast? Have you eaten or not?
It's weird because I got up 2 hours ago and I still haven't eaten. But I
that's
got
the middle
up
of the night
because
for you. You must be starving.
it was because I'm so anxious about all this technology stuff that's going on right now. So I was trying to make sure I had all my cords, and I was just so focused on that. I didn't even think about eating until I asked you if you ate. I was like, oh wait, I didn't eat. But I did make myself.
Okay, so we're going to hear your stomach rumbling.
Yes, that's not thunder in the background, you guys. That's just my stomach. But I did make myself a cup of coffee with a lot of our raw cream in it. So that's a pretty complete breakfast, right? Protein and fat and everything.
Yeah, that sounds lovely.
Yeah.
I've got a review, which we've got 2 new reviews,
Ooh.
and I thought I'd read one of them.
Thank you, guys.
This one's from AB in WA, and it was left on Apple Podcasts. So thank you, AB. And the title was Love Ancestral Kitchen.
Aww.
And AB wrote, educational and inspirational. I never miss it.
Oh, man.
Very succinct and very beautiful. Thank you very much. It's so lovely to see that there are a growing number of reviews up there, and hopefully that will bring us more and more listeners, which we like. So thank you very much if you've taken the time to leave us a review. If you haven't yet, the details are in the show notes as to how you can do that. Thank you very much.
I love how Lexi's husband says on their podcast, leave us your most honest 5-star review. And he said once, and if you don't have a 5-star review, don't say anything.
Yeah.
I thought that was funny. But no, it really actually makes a huge difference to these podcast apps when people review, because podcast apps, I guess, assume if nobody's reviewing it, nobody cares. But we care about our broth, people.
Yeah.
Care about our
Big
kitchens.
time.
So yeah, leave those reviews.
Indeed.
When I get these awesome messages from people, and I always think, oh man, I should have asked them, can you make that a review? I always forget. So thank you for leaving that review, AB. All right, Alison, are we ready? Is this it? It's happening?
I think I am.
This is the day? Okay, well, this is long awaited, long anticipated. And I have been listening to Alison talk about this all for a year.
A long time.
When we get together, she tells me, oh my goodness, we've been recording or whatever. So this is a long time coming, much anticipated. And finally, today is the day we get to talk about rye sourdough, mastering the basics.
Indeed.
All right, Alison, first of all,
indeed.
I'm going to throw out there that we're not going to cover everything rye sourdough in this episode. There's literally not time. I mean, you just spent a year creating a resource. Yeah. So there's no way we can cover all that in 1 hour, but we can give a lot.
You don't want to know what's in my brain about rye. That's for sure. You'd be here a very long time.
Even when I talk to Rob, it's always like, yeah, well, we just had rye. We're eating a lot of rye bread right now. Like just rye is coming out of all your ears. But so there's more than we can ever possibly cover in a podcast episode. But you can give us a good starter here and then point us in the right direction. I'm hoping.
Yeah.
Please.
Certainly.
Help.
Certainly.
Send help.
Yeah. So when I thought about what I wanted to say in this episode, I thought, well, where did this kind of start, why am I so obsessed with rye? And I think when I answer that question honestly, it's because I love it. I mean, I haven't used wheat in my kitchen since I started making sourdough. I've not made wheat breads, but rye is just so special. And I tried to delineate what I thought was so great about rye and put it into 4 reasons. So I'm going to hit you with 4 reasons that I love rye and rye is so wonderful. Exactly. I tried to make it succinct because there's a lot to share, but I wanted to make it not overwhelming and clear to people. So the first thing that's great about rye is its gluten content. So really the reason why I started making rye is because of Rob, my husband. He had a wheat allergy or a wheat intolerance, I would say. It came clear in his early 20s when he was very, very, very ill. And he got to the point where he literally could not even breathe in like the flour in a bakery, for example, without being extremely ill. That's how intolerant he was to wheat. And at that point, that kind of triggered him to look at his diet and completely change like the way he was living. And he just gave up all grains at that point because he was very, very ill. And I think he kind of thought, well, I'm never going to be able to eat bread again, you know? And when we first got together, neither of us was eating bread. We went through various kind of ways of eating, and we were on gaps for a while, so we weren't eating any grains at all. And then when I came back to making sourdough just under a decade ago, it was clear that I couldn't give Rob wheat. And I wanted to have spelt, which I love, but spelt's very similar to wheat, whereas rye isn't. And Rob had remembered in his past that he'd liked rye bread. And so I started experimenting with rye in order that he could try it and see how he got on with it. And he found he could eat rye. He could eat it absolutely fine without any problems. When I created it sourdough, I don't know about kind of standard yeasted rye breads. He's never been down that route. But he absolutely loves rye. He loves the flavour of it. He loves the fact that he can eat it without getting ill. He loves the fact that it gives him a concentrated source of calories, you know, rather than just eating kind of cooked millet or something that isn't so dense in calories. And he just loves the fact he can eat bread and it tastes so great.
Yeah.
And rye does have gluten in it, but it has 3 times less gluten than wheat. So it's much, much less dense in gluten. But also it has a different type of gluten to wheat. So I think a lot of people who have problems with wheat, it's because of the certain type of protein makeup of the gluten that is dominant in wheat. Whereas rye has a different type of gluten. So it may be that if you are sensitive to gluten, it might just be that rye has the type of gluten that perhaps you don't have so many problems with. Certainly that's the case with Rob. And so I feel like, you know, reason one about why rye is such a useful type of bread for us to have in the world that we live in today is because it just doesn't have that gluten issue that wheat does at all. And yet it makes a wonderful bread.
And we need bread, don't we?
Well, I think we do. I
do.
You know, bread is a fundamental, it's a staple, and it has been for, you know, tens of thousands of years, at least 10,000 years, if not more. And it's so portable, it's so practical, it's so calorie dense, it's so flexible, and it provides a simple meal in such a glorious way without you having to think, oh, I've got to cook this, I've got to cook that, I've got to cook that. It's just there. And also you can take it out. So, you know, when Rob goes into Florence and he needs to take some lunch with him because he's going to be there all day, well, I make him a sandwich with rye sourdough bread and he takes it and it gives him enough energy until he gets back home and he's got dinner in the evening.
Yeah. And it's so foundational to the beginning of every civilization. And give us this day our daily bread. You know, it's in like the most famous prayer. And companion, like we have our companionship level, com meaning with and pan being bread. Like your companion is the person you're breaking bread with. It's part of our humanity, I guess. So I love this because so many.
And I feel.
Well, it's just so many of us think exactly what you and Rob are doing. I just can't have bread anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a way out.
Yeah, I feel really strongly about rye from this perspective because so many people think they have to have gluten-free bread if they don't get on well with wheat, if wheat doesn't sit very well in their
Yep.
stomach after they've eaten it.
I
But
did. That's
it's
what I
not
thought.
necessarily the case.
Yeah.
You know, give rye a try. It's particularly soured rye, you know, sourdough rye. It's a world away from standard wheat bread, and it might mean that you can make nice bread and you can have nice bread again without worrying about all the other ingredients and making something that's gluten free and getting flours from here, there, and everywhere, and all the additives, you know,
Weird
the
little
kind of
powders
starches
and
and
things.
things that you have to put in. Yeah. So it's been revelationary for Rob, completely revelationary. It's changed his life.
If you don't have celiacs, as you and I and Rob, I don't think either. I don't think any of us
No.
do, but do struggle with wheat and things like that. There is something about the really old edition of grains that is so much more digestible and tolerable. Kind of like when I found raw milk and couldn't handle regular milk, but raw milk and the fermented milks worked for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question that I think is going to lead you into your next one. This is great, everything you're saying, but how does it taste?
Yeah.
Is
So
it good?
number 2 is taste. Yeah. So that's the other reason that I started making rye bread. Just because in the past, before I stopped grains and long before I started making sourdough, I used to buy rye bread from a shop. And I absolutely loved them. You know, the deep, heavy kind of Russian black breads, the seeds inside, the caraway, the different spices. There's just such an amazing litany of delicious rye loaves. A lot of them from the cultures that used rye and could grow it, because often rye grows in places that wheat just can't grow because it can grow under snow. It can grow, you know, at different latitudes completely. And those cultures often had to survive just as rye as their only grain. And so they've come up with just amazing. If you think about pumpernickel, if you think about the Danish breads like rugbrod, you think about the German breads, there's an amazing past of all these different flavours that bring out the flavour of the rye grain, and also other things to incorporate it in them. And for me, I wanted to include that in the rye sourdough course that I've just been creating, as you said, over the last 6 months. And my favourite kind of unusual rye bread is called Borodinsky, which is a Russian bread.
Just
and
sounds good.
There are a ton of stories as to where the name comes from. There was a Battle of Borodinsky in the Napoleonic Wars in, I think, 1912.
Wow.
And the story that I like most about this bread is that there were 2 trucks. One was carrying rye and one was carrying caraway seeds, and they both got hit in this battle. And so the locals had these 2 things and they had to combine them, and then they came up with this Borodinsky bread, named it Borodinsky after the battle that was happening. Borodinsky is not only do you get the rich, deep flavour of rye, which is just there as part of the grain, but it includes a scald, which is heating a portion of the flour with hot water and then putting it into the dough. And that makes an incredible sweetness. And it's combined with a little bit of malt and a little bit of toasted caraway. And the flavours are just, I have never tasted a rye bread like it, or a bread like it. It is incredible, and it is an amazing bread. And I wanted to include that in the course to show that, you know, not only can you make normal sandwich bread that you can slice and, you know, put cheese in and lettuce and take to lunch at work, but you can also make breads that will blow your socks off with the depth and richness and texture and flavours. And it just, other flours can't give that. I think it's more difficult to combine spices and other adjuncts with more wheat-based flours, whereas rye has kind of synergies with a lot of the spices like, you know, aniseed and coriander and cumin and caraway. And there were recipes with sauerkraut, with orange, with all these other flavors. And it just tastes amazing, and it doesn't taste anything like wheat bread. It is, to have an interesting palette to your flavors in a week or a day, to put rye bread in there gives you a completely different experience, and it brings me and Rob and Gabriel a lot of joy, for sure.
This is like a rye commercial. I'm just like, I just want it now. I already knew I loved rye bread, but also I looked up the Battle of Borodino, and guess what that battle took place in 1812 on the old calendar.
Oh, it was 1812.
August 26th.
I was a century out.
That's 3 days from...
Oh, you're joking?
Yeah, I'm not joking.
Really?
It's 3 days from the date of recording.
We're recording on the 23rd.
Yeah.
That's really freaky.
That is insane.
Wow.
No, that you're absolutely right, Alison. The depth of flavor you can get out of rye and other ancient grains just stuns me, because I never knew, flour's supposed to have a taste. So do you age your breads?
Yeah, that's a good question, because rye is kind of known for being able to age well. I think, in fact, it was the kind of desired bread for sea voyages, because you could keep it and you could take it with you, and it keeps much, much longer. Yeah. Also, the flavours develop. So generally what people say is, if you make a rye bread, you should not cut it for 24 hours. Ideally, you should not cut it for 48 hours. That is sometimes hard to do if you're hungry.
I can imagine.
But it carries on cooking for, until it gets cold. So for at least 8 hours after you've taken it out of the oven, it carries on cooking. And then the flavours carry on developing in a way that just doesn't happen with other grains. And so we generally find we try to cut ours like a day or 2 days after we've made it, and we will just leave it in our bread bin until that point. And then over a week's period, the flavour will get stronger and more intense. It will change every day, and by about day 5, day 6, it's really rich. And generally our loaves will last about a week in, the humidity and temperature that we've got here. We age them in that we don't cut them for 2 days ideally, and then we enjoy them for a whole week. So rather than perhaps the wheat bread going either stale or mouldy, depending on your humidity, probably more likely stale, the rye breads just don't do that. They last much, much longer, and their flavour increases and enhances over a week, for sure.
Like every good ferment. And if you want to know about some of the other gut benefits of sourdoughs, do check out our episode on sourdough, or on bread, just an episode purely on bread. And Alison talks about, you're fermenting this, but then you're cooking it. Does it still have benefits to your gut? And yes, it does. So go check that out. Okay, so you talked about caraway and rye. Other flavors, other flours, anything else you mix with it?
Yeah, often. I mean, I experiment with rye now, and I think, once you've got the basics of rye down, you then are free to go and play with whatever you want to. So, like I think I mentioned, you can put citrus in, you can put any of those spices
That
in,
sounds
you can
like a
put
good
sauerkraut
Christmas
in,
loaf.
you can put beer in. Yeah, exactly. Christmas loaf. You can put raisins and peels and all that kind of thing in. There are a myriad of different flavours that you can add to rye, and that work really synergistically with rye. And I've just started to kind of experiment further with, putting sauerkraut in, which is a fun thing to do, particularly if your sauerkraut's flavoured. Yeah. And I want to try putting some onions in a bread as well, to kind of get that real kind of savoury caramelised flavour with the rye as well. Really, it's once you understand how rye works and how to work with it, you can then go just crazy and do whatever you want to, whatever takes your fancy. I think it's fun.
Do you think Jimena's gonna listen to this, and then we're gonna start seeing posts on Instagram of her delicious rye loaves with all kinds of cool things mixed in? I can't wait.
I hope so.
I'll bet you could put a whole cooked egg in the middle of one too, like a hard-boiled egg, and make one of those loaves with the egg in it that you slice. Okay, so you use
that sounds good.
100% whole grain, and is that because of the flavor, or?
Yeah. It's kind of a bit the flavour. I do love the flavour of it because it's got all the bran in. You get that depth of flavour of bran that is just is incomparable. You can't produce that flavour from a white rye bread.
Right.
I also use 100% rye, whole grain rye, because I think that sieving flour is kind of, it feels to me like an extra process on something, and it requires extra energy. And really, by nature, I sort of I swing towards what's the easiest and wholest way to do this. And I also feel like it's a waste. You know, when we have this whole grain that we can grind up and use, and it tastes so fabulous, then why not use the whole grain? Why not learn to use the whole grain? Why not make your baking work with the whole grain, particularly as it tastes so fabulous? So why take it out? Why bother sieving it? Why throw it away? Let's use the whole of what's there and get the benefits, the nutrients from the bran, as well as the nutrients from the white as well. It seems like a win-win for me to use 100% whole grain.
Didn't one of the ladies in Karima's book say something about sometimes they sieved flour for some festival or something? I'm trying to remember. But I feel like somebody said that in there, but they didn't do it much, or she basically said the same thing. I'm trying to remember if that was in that book.
Yeah, I think that sometimes I have never used white rye flour. I just haven't.
So white?
Mainly because the bread's like, there is a white,
Okay.
completely.
Wow. Okay.
And the Polish recipes use it a fair bit.
Interesting.
First of all, I can't get it very easily where I am. But secondly, it feels like a kind of a shadow of the whole grain, because the whole grain rye has so much flavour in it. And it just, the breads that I like the flavour of use the bran. And so I've just headed down that route because it seems to be, it ticks all the boxes for me.
You know, have you ever had orange juice with all the orange sieved out? It's called water. Boring.
It's just an orange coloured water.
Are we going to do an episode with Elly about grinding flour coming up? Is that okay?
Yes, we are.
Okay, good.
We are. Okay. That's going to come up in a few months'
that
time.
That would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so where do you get your flour? You said you can't get white, but where do you get your whole grain?
Yeah, so for me, I get my whole grain rye from mills in Italy. It's grown in Italy, it's milled in Italy, and I buy directly from the mill. Amazing. And I kind of, if you can't grind your own grain, I recommend buying your flour from a mill directly, rather than, going and kind of hunting for it on some third-party place. In the UK, whole grain rye is sometimes called wholemeal. So I think in the States it's called whole grain all the time. In the UK and Europe, sometimes called wholemeal. I have noticed though in the US that there are different kind of names for it. So sometimes it's just called whole rye flour. Sometimes it's called whole grain rye flour. Sometimes it's called dark rye flour. And sometimes I think King Arthur possibly call it pumpernickel flour, because it's a flour that people use for pumpernickel bread. Which can be a bit confusing. So the thing I would say is, if you're unsure, pumpernickel.
I mean, it's a common term. You hear it, you see it, pumpernickel bread, whatever. But I never. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. What do I know?
That's right. It's traditionally pumpernickel is cooked for like 24 hours in a bread in an oven for at like 50 C, I think 50 centigrade. The traditional pumpernickel recipe is cooked literally for a whole day, which I will get to soon.
Maybe not in
but
the summer,
I would say, if you're confused, no, not in the summer, when I need the heat, I should do it. And I do look at the descriptions. What I did notice when I went searching for rye flours in different geographies was that if you look in the description of the flour, look for the terms unsifted or whole grain and go by that. So, for example, the pumpernickel flour I saw, it just says it's unsifted, it's the whole grain, and that's what you're looking for. No sifting and the whole grain. Okay. Ideally, the flour would be organic, because it's the best flour you can get. It will have the whole nutrients in, and it will have respected the soil and the environment. And stone ground flour retains more of its nutrients rather than roller mill flour. And if you've got your own home grinder, then you can buy the berries and grind it yourself. Then you don't have to worry about that. You know you've got the whole grain because you've just seen it go through the machine, which is really nice.
That is nice. And I told you my friend Brenna, who just bought a big farm in Missouri, shout out to Brenna, gave me a bunch of her organic baking goods, and we eat the same things, so that was awesome. What a blessing. But she gave me rye flakes, and I had never heard of that. And you suggested just fermenting it like in your oatmeal bake that you sent out on your email list the other day. You said try using it in that. Okay, so sourdough, but we need a starter, so maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, of course. So I think sourdough starters are like, I don't know, they're like some big wedge that stops people from making sourdough, and they just shouldn't be.
Yeah.
I have a thing that I say quite a lot, which is you should manage your starter. Your starter should not run your life, because I hear from so many people who like, I tried to do this, I'm looking after it, I'm doing it right, I'm keeping it on the calendar, and they're so confused and so despairing, and they give up, and then, you know, a year later they think, oh, I wish I'd done that.
Yeah. No, you're right. That does happen.
Sourdough starters, I remember when I started making starters, I read all the books from the library about sourdough baking.
Of course you did.
And they all said different things about starters. And I was just like, what? This person says this person says that, this person says... And I tried making starters with various different flours. And I got in a muddle. And it wasn't really until I found whole grain rye that I started to see the wood for the trees and find a way of making a starter that worked for me and still works for me. I make my starters for all of my breads with whole grain rye flour, whether I'm making a bread out of rye or spelt or barley, or even our gluten-free breads, because we don't need them to be gluten-free. I make with a rye starter. Whole grain rye makes the most amazing, easy to maintain starter.
Why is that?
It's for several reasons. And firstly, the rye grain itself has so many microbes on it that it just is so much more alive than other grains. That's what I've found, and that's what, you know, I've read since making a success out of my rye starter. It starts. You don't need any extra things in your starter, pineapple juice or any of these things that other people say. Sugar, you don't need any sauce like that. You just put the whole grain rye flour in, and I think because it has the bran in, which is kind of more on the outside, it just is the host of many, many more microbes that are ready to transform and make you a really kicking starter. In addition, whole grain rye takes up water in a very different way to wheat, even whole grain wheat, in that it kind of soaks up. And so instead of becoming a slurry, as often a wheat starter will, it becomes a paste. And because you're able to keep it as a paste rather than more liquidy, it lasts longer. So you don't have to keep attending to it every day. So with my whole grain rye sourdough starter, I mix it up, and it's a starter. I put it in the fridge. I keep it in the fridge, and I bake maybe once or twice a week. When I'm ready to bake, I take my starter out, and I use some of it to make a leaven overnight to make a bread the next day. And I keep doing that for maybe a week, 10 days. My starter's still going. I haven't done anything else to it. I haven't refreshed it. I haven't done anything to it. After about a week, it either runs out, or when I open it, I think, it's starting to smell quite strong. And I'll just refresh it with some more whole grain rye flour and water. And then I'll put it back in the fridge and I forget about it. And I think I attend to my starter. I mean, apart from making bread, I worry about my starter, I don't know, every 10 days. Perhaps I do something with it.
That's amazing.
And it just, because it's rye and because I've found, a hydration of it, that means it doesn't need feeding all the time. It works. It's incredible. There's none, if you leave it in the fridge, it doesn't get that kind of hooch on the top that wheat starters can often get, and then you're worried, should I throw that away? What's going on with it? It very, very rarely goes mouldy. I think sometimes I've left it in the fridge for like 6 weeks. It's absolutely fine. It just needs feeding again. It's an absolute marvel. And anyone, I've been banging on about whole grain rye flour as a starter medium for years now, because it just works, and it means that you can just keep a starter and you don't need to worry about it.
And you use it for all your sourdoughs.
All my sourdoughs, yeah.
That's great. Oh, that's awesome. And quick question. You said every 10 days, so probably not. But do you have a specific day, like, every Sunday I feed it? Or do you just kind of do it as you go?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm not that organised. Usually what happens is I spot it in the fridge and I think, I haven't looked at that for a few days. And it's that forgiving, and I'll open it and I'll smell it and I think, it's all right. I'm a bit busy. I can't do it now. It smells all right. It can go another couple of days, and I'll just put it back on the shelf. And then I'll think, okay, it was a couple of days ago I smelled that. I should really refresh that today, and I'll get it out and just get a new jar, put some of the old stuff in, put some flour and water in, stir it, put the lid back on, put it in the fridge.
And do you have discard recipes in your I've even really said what the rye course is, but do you have discard oh my gosh, discard recipes in there? I can't even talk.
Yeah, so perhaps we should talk about the course.
Let's talk about that.
The last 6 months I've been working on a course which distills a lot of the information that I've learnt about rye, and it is up and available to purchase at the Fermentation School. We'll give you all the details of it, because we've got a special discount for podcast listeners as well. And with that course, I wanted to explain everything about sourdough starter, explain why rye is so wonderful, explain how rye works, how it's different from wheat. And I wanted to walk people through 2 recipes that will enable them to understand rye, make it in their own kitchens and get going with it. And so at the end of the course, ready to either carry on making the 2 loaves because they absolutely love it, or move on and start experimenting with other rye recipes. So back to the question, yes, as well as all of the other stuff in the course, there is a discard section, because that's a question that I get a lot. What can I do with my discard? And with the starter routine that I explain in the course, some weeks I don't have any discard because I've used all my discard when I've baked. But some weeks I'm busier and I haven't made as many breads, or I've got one in the freezer and so I don't need to. And I end up thinking, this starter needs refreshing and I've got a bit left to use. And my favourite ways of using my rye sourdough discard are in pancakes and in rye spice bread. And both of those recipes are in the course. I actually videoed making both of them, including the pancakes, because my pancakes don't have any eggs in. I think people think you have to have eggs in pancakes, and you don't. This
is awesome.
Because Gabriel, my son, can't eat eggs. But people do struggle with getting a pancake large enough to look like a pancake, and also being able to turn it in a pan without it breaking. And so many people have asked me about that. And how do you make these pancakes 8 inches across with no egg in, and yet they look perfect? And so I filmed myself with the cast iron pan, showing what the batter consistency should be, how to put it in the pan, how to know when to turn it, and kind of just the things that I've learned over making thousands of sourdough pancakes to make them just look like a pancake without falling apart. So that recipe's in there. And also the spice bread recipe. Again, it's filmed. There's a lot of video in the course, over 2 hours worth of video on all the recipes. And
you said you've been working on it.
And
Oh, sorry.
a long time.
Well, you said you've been working on the course
I haven't had a life.
for 6 months, but in reality, you've been working on the course for years. You just did a lot of the bulk of the recording and writing for it and the art in the last 6 months. And so I think that's one of the best advantages about this. When I was talking to Melissa Norris, and she said there's so many people who want to write about something or give advice about something, and they've been doing it for 3 months. But there's a real value in a veteran who's been doing something year over year over year and can tell you, hey, times and seasons, different, this is what happens. There's there's not a lot of that out there. The
value is in all the failures.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Because I've made all of the mistakes. I've messed up the pancakes hundreds of times, not hundreds of times, but a lot, and I'll learn. And I've worked out how when the bread is ready to put in the oven, and how when it's too late, and how when it's too early. And I've worked out how to mix the bread without getting it all over the place, and what tools to use, and just all those mistakes and things that when you've done things every single week,
and you know exactly
for a decade,
how it works and exactly how it doesn't.
You just know how to do that.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of that.
And
in courses and
it's
Instagram
really
things
daunting.
online. There's just all these people who are like, oh yeah, I've been homeschooling for 6 months. Here's my advice. And it's like, well, I don't know. Give me a mom who's graduated 7 kids.
I think it's really daunting to start something new.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling daunted at the beginning of making sourdough. And I remember the books from the library being useful to a point. They all had pictures in, and that was good.
Sure.
But the video makes such a difference.
I agree.
And that's why I chose that medium. I could have just written it up and done it as a book.
Yeah.
But the video, it's like I want the people there with me in my kitchen. And that's the best way I can do it. You can see in my bowl, I tell you why I'm using this particular thing, and I'll tell you all of this other stuff that has just come from 10 years of making it. And it's like being in my kitchen with me. Because you can look in the bowl and you can
I want
see
to be
what
in
I'm
the
doing.
kitchen with you. So, and I know you've probably got to try out your discard recipes a bit, because Rob has said things like, well, I think we have 7 loaves in the freezer, like you just keep stacking up as you try all these things. Okay. So, you just alluded to, something that I know is your fourth and final point, but is not talked about much anywhere. And that was the mixing and the getting it everywhere.
Yeah. This is, as you said, this is my fourth kind of benefit, or I see as one of the biggest benefits of rye, in that you do not need to knead rye, and you do not have to do any of these particular shaping things. You see people who kind of take the wheat loaf, and they tuck this bit under and tuck that bit under and tuck it again, and then they put it down on the side and they let it sit for 20 minutes, and somehow magically it stays the same shape. You're like, how does that happen? Mine goes flat,
That's because it's 1,000% gluten.
You don't have to do that. I know. You don't have to do that with rye. And that, at the beginning, when I started making sourdough, that was a daunting thing for me. How am I going to shape these loaves and make them look like this and that and the other? And when I realised that you don't have to do that with rye, I was like, oh, I can just make this bread, and it feeds my husband, and he loves the flavour of it, and I love the flavour of it, and I don't have to worry about tightening the skin of it to make it this or that, and I don't have to sit there and knead it. That felt like I was being let off the hook. I was like, yeah, I'm in this. I'm making this bread. Yeah, exactly. Let off the dough hook, because rye works differently to wheat.
Okay.
And it means that when you're making the bread, you just don't need to. You don't work it in the same way as wheat. So when you're making wheat bread, you add the water to the wheat and you get the gluten, the 2 proteins, gliadin and glutenin, that make gluten together. And with that, the gluten enzymes change the gluten and make this kind of a mesh in your bread. And when you work the bread, making wheat, that develops the gluten. So with wheat, you have to knead, or you fold, you stretch and fold, you do all these things, which makes the gluten stronger. And then that gluten forms like, literally a net, a mesh, and the air bubbles are trapped inside that. And that's what gives your wheat bread rise. And when you shape the bread, you create this kind of a skin, which then will burst through and give you the kind of the ears or the cracks that you see on wheat breads. With rye, it's just completely different. When you add water to rye flour, the pentasands, which are the complex carbs in rye, make a gel with that water. And then it's that gel that traps the fermenting and cooking gases. And you don't need to knead the bread to do anything to make that gel. The gel just happens when you mix water and rye together. And it doesn't rise as much as a wheat bread rises. The gluten mesh network has more capability to trap air than the gel does in rye. But still, the gel traps air and rye breads will rise. And there are tricks to getting the rye bread to rise more. You know,
and you tell us the tricks.
I go into lots of detail on that in the course. And there are ways that it can go wrong because other things happen at the same time as that gel is formed, which can attack your crumb and mean that it breaks down. So there is some nuance to watching it. You know, with a rye bread, you don't have to knead it and you don't have to shape it, but you do have to watch it. And because there are signs that will tell you whether it's being attacked or whether it's ready to bake. So you just need to use your eyes, really. You don't have to use your arms. So if you've got shoulders that are not very strong, like mine, you don't have to worry about kneading it. If you're worried about creating this skin and shaping it, you don't have to worry about it. One of my breads in the course, literally you spoon the dough out of the bowl into the tin and you push it down.
Wow.
So that's it. You don't need to shape anything. The other one, the Borodinsky bread, you put water on your surface, you dump the dough out of the bowl and you wet your hands and you just, as if you were working with clay, you shape the bread into a kind of a bread-like shape to fit in your tin, just using your hands as if it was clay. Wow. There's no tucking things under, and you lift it up and you put it in the pan.
Brilliant.
And it's an amazing thing because you don't have to worry about kneading it if you can't manage it physically. You can even mix in a mixer. I mean, lots of people make rye breads in mixers, so you don't have to be involved in it with your hands at all. I love using my hands, though. I need hand strength for it, not shoulder strength.
Yeah.
And you don't need to shape. So the working is my number 4. I think that there's much less kind of pressure on you, particularly if you're a new sourdough baker, to feel like you've got to master all these skills. Because with rye, you don't have to. There's 2 there that you don't have to master at all.
Yeah. And I'm always got my eye out for recipes that you can make with a baby on the hip. And that sounds like one of them.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of what we said in the broth episode, where we were saying it's not difficult. It's just different. Maybe from what you've done before.
Completely. So, and it's understanding that difference.
Yeah. And I love that you break it down because I know just the discussions you and I have had peripherally about this course, just from those discussions, I've learned so much. So I'm really just excited to take the course and learn all of that. Do you ever see, well, you don't watch movies, but it always annoys me when I watch movies that are supposed to be set in the old days and they're kneading bread and you're like, that's obviously modern wheat. Like there's no way they would have had bread like that. Okay, so let's actually talk about the course because we keep referencing it, but I don't. Okay. I mean, you and I have been talking about this course, but I feel like we haven't actually told the
listeners haven't.
About it. Yeah, I don't know what's in it. Like, what are they talking about?
Yeah. Okay, so the course, you can actually go and have a look at it while you're listening if you want to. So I've got a link, which is my website, www.ancestralkitchen.com/rye. And that's how you can go and have a look at the course. Easy. It will redirect to the Fermentation School, which is a fabulous women-owned and women-led, women-run fermentation school with courses online.
I love that.
And The course will walk you through, by the end of the course, you'll know all about rye, you'll know all about its history, all about the health benefits of it. You'll understand why breads are different to wheat, how they actually work, and how to make them the best that they can be, get the most rise from them and understand how that rising works. You'll have created and be maintaining a rye sourdough starter that is easy and will not run your life. Then you'll have 2 breads that you've mastered, which will be an everyday rye sourdough, which is a kind of a beginner's loaf, relatively simple in its techniques. And that's the one that you just scrape out of the bowl and put in your loaf tin. It's cuttable, sandwichable, really delicious, and lasts a long time. That's a super simple loaf. There's then also this second loaf, the Borodinsky, the Russian rye loaf, which will teach you another technique, which is scalding, because there's a scald inside that. And you'll also toast some seeds, some caraway seeds, and some malt to go in it. And that will kind of give you another window onto a different type of loaf, different techniques, different flavours, and what's possible with rye. And then there's many ways to use a sourdough discard, including the pancakes and the spice bread that I talked about. Really, what I wanted to do with the course is either, someone who has never made sourdough before could take this course. Literally, it will walk them through everything they need to know if they have never, ever made a starter, never, ever made sourdough at all. It will take them through the whole thing. Okay. So if you've never made sourdough before and you love rye and you want to cook with rye and use it in your baking, then you could use this course and it would give you everything you need. If you've got someone who can't handle wheat, and maybe you've made sourdough, or you're making sourdough, but you know someone who doesn't do very well with wheat, this will bring rye into your kitchen and enable you to make breads for them. Also, if you love baking and you love rye, this will just open the door of rye to you, to the point where at the end you'll be able to go off, wherever you started from, and explore all these other rye recipes, bring rye into other flours in your loaf if you want to. But I called it Rye Sourdough Bread Mastering the Basics. That's what the course is called, because that's where you'll be at the end. The basics of rye, you will understand the chemistry, you will understand practically how it works, you will have seen loaves, you will have made them, and you'll be ready to move on and just do whatever you want to with rye.
Oh, I love that.
I think we said at the beginning, I did say that there's a discount, a 15% discount for anyone who's listening to the podcast. So if you go to ancestralkitchen.com/rye, you will be able to see the course, and there's at least one free preview video on there that you can watch, so you can see me talking. You can then kind of break down, and you'll be able to see all the different modules in the course and all the different sort of chapters that are in there, and which one's a video and which one's a text. So before you think about potentially getting it, you can see very clearly what you're going to get. Good. And then if you decide that you want to go ahead, if you put the code podcast15, so podcast is PODCAST, all capitals, and then 15, all one kind of word together, in at the checkout, you will get 15% off my course. Nice. Because I just feel like podcast listeners have been following this journey. They've been listening to all the episodes. They've been listening to me making rye bread and eating rye bread every single episode for the last 6 months. And I love it. And I'd like them to see and to start creating with rye in their kitchens, because it's a wonderful thing. Absolutely. It's a really wonderful grain.
And this is one of those things, take the course, learn it until it's, the way you know it, like Alison knows it inside and out. And then that's your knowledge forever, which you can pass on to your kids and your grandkids and everybody in your community. It's amazing. I love it. I'm really excited about it, Alison, because I've never done an exclusively rye loaf. I've done mixes, but never just rye. So this is going to be my initiation.
Well, this is perfect for you.
It is. I mean, I've been making sourdough for years, and I cannot wait to get into, crack this code and get into this with you. So yeah, both for somebody who's been doing sourdough for a while and for somebody who's new to it, I love that we can all join you in the kitchen. And I feel like I need a documentary on just the technology side of you guys doing this without all the modern equipment, and how you pulled that off was pretty remarkable.
Gosh, yeah. That was challenging,
Yeah.
but I did it, and it feels like it's nice. I like standing in a kitchen and mixing and talking and
Oh, yeah.
and knowing
You're really
that
good at it.
people who want it are gonna get something from it. Are gonna start baking rye because of it. It feels like I get pleasure from it. It's a nice thing to do.
Well, the patrons already have a few videos of you. Remember when you and I got together, I think 2 times last year, and we cooked on Zoom together? So patrons can see how you do it when there's somebody cutting down a tree outside your window. But
yeah, luckily that didn't happen.
what? But
Yeah,
you're really
I
great
did it
with
slightly
that,
differently
doing it
in
on
this
camera.
course, in that I got a camera above my bowl as well. So
Oh, that's
sometimes I'm
cool.
sitting talking and showing things at the table, but other times
Yeah.
I managed to get the camera directly above my bowl, so all you see is my hands and the
Nice.
bowl working, which is so much nicer,
Oh, I'm really excited about this.
to really see.
Yeah. Awesome.
So,
Well, this
thank
is
you.
such a good introduction
you.
to rye, and the course this is the hero the world needs. The course is going to be amazing. Amazing.
Thank you.
I really want that.
And I hope
Borodinsky.
that, for anyone who's interested in rye, I hope I've tried to explain in the last, I don't know, it's been nearly an hour, I think, why rye is so good and the particular kind of benefits of it to fill in gaps in knowledge, because it's really an unsung hero, rye. It should have more press.
Yeah.
It should
Yeah.
be more out there, because it's a wonderful grain, and I know that some people listening contact me and they're baking with rye already, and they know how good it is, and I wish more people knew. So,
And it's definitely
that's
one of those
part of my
things
mission.
where I get a lot of these really complex questions from people, and I'm just like, I don't know, like I've been doing this for, this and this way, and I'm just like, I have no idea. But all those dud loaves that you guys went through to figure out those little details on the proofing and everything is going to be excellent. So ancestralkitchen.com/rye and use the code podcast15 all caps to get your listener discount. We're so grateful to you guys listening to the podcast.
Yeah.
All right, Alison, anything else?
Thank you ever so much, Andrea. Thank you for your lovely questions. No, I think that's it.
Thank you for answering
my
them.
end, for sure.
All right. Well, until next time.
I'm going to go off and eat some rye, probably.
I wish. Soon, after I take the course.
I'll speak to you soon.
Right, bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth, and Alison's at ancestral_kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.